Good morning. We'll be getting started in just a couple of moments. And good morning. If you're just joining us, we'll get started in just a couple of moments. Good morning, and thank you for joining us for the 2020 Regional Economic Outlook for 2021. We're ready to get started.
I think that right now we are trying to still decipher what 2021 is going to be about. The two engines of New Haven is Yale New Haven Hospital and Yale University primarily. And one of those engines is really operating at half capacity, if not less, because of COVID. I think I look at the next year as a year that a lot of, especially small businesses, are going to be needing a lot of help.
This winter, I'm a bit fearful for small businesses. I think we survived the summer based on a lot of kind of outdoor dining, and in Connecticut, I'm worried locally that a lot of small businesses will go out of business prior to the vaccine. So I'm just hopeful that we can get through the winter, that the vaccine will come and people can really just survive for maybe the next 2 seasons.
There must be an increase of foot traffic in the downtown area. It is imperative that the message coming from New Haven is that businesses are open.
The missing piece of information, I think, the speed of the vaccine, how many people are going to take it, can we get by some of this stuff, can travel come back, can airplanes come back? But also, this is a change of policy in Washington, new administration, all these new people getting into new positions. How long is it going to take to hit the ground running? Is there another stimulus package?
There's a lot of unknowns. One decision can be catastrophic to the real estate industry. And one decision can be just the biggest opportunity that real estate market has ever seen before.
Just a month ago, we knew that a vaccine was possible. Now we started planning. Before that, we were all tactical. We were all trying to be as lean as possible with our business and try to get us as much help as we could. After November 8th, you're now starting to see, okay, let's see if we could plan something, commit some capital investments.
2020 has been a tough year, but as we're sitting here in December, I do feel a genuine sense of optimism looking ahead to 2021, whether that's politically or with COVID and the vaccine developments. I think it's pretty clear that 2021 is going to be an improvement over 2020.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us for our annual Regional Economic Outlook presented by People's United Bank. We're so glad to have you with us. And what can we say about 2020 other than we are optimistic about 2021? But so many questions, and you heard them in our video from Juan, Kevin, Kim, Chris, and Roberta, and I know you all have them as well. We're going to address as many of them as we can with our speakers today. First, we'll hear about tax policy, then the virus and the vaccine, and finally, the outlook for the economy. We have a great lineup of speakers, and we thank People's United Bank for their continued support of this event. They've been our sponsor for this event for so many years now. And it's my pleasure to now introduce Kevin Doherty, Growth Manager and First Vice President for New Haven and New London markets with People's United Bank, and the Secretary of the Chamber's Board of Directors. Kevin, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, good morning, Garrett. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. So, hey, thanks, Garrett, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Greater New Haven Chamber of Commerce Economic Outlook event. We have an impressive lineup of speakers this morning, as Garrett had mentioned, to help all of us understand the economic impact of the COVID-19, where we've been, and quite frankly, what to expect in 2021. But, before we introduce those guests, I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you to Garrett and his team for hosting so many helpful pandemic-related virtual events this past year. I think it's safe to say that if there was one reliable and easily accessible resource to help us understand the COVID-19, without question, it would be the New Haven Chamber of Commerce. So way to go, Garrett. And again, thank you to you and your team. So, hey, listen, on behalf of People's United Bank, Garrett had mentioned we've been doing this event for many years, and we wish everyone a safe and a healthy 2021, where our team will continue to meet our customers' commercial and retail banking needs. And we'll make sure we do so through our online banking services, or you can do so by visiting one of our branches, and we'll be sure to handle your banking needs in a safe way. We have 3 full-service branches located right in the city of New Haven, roughly 25 branches scattered throughout New Haven County. And of course, we also have our wealth management and our commercial divisions located right at 1 Whitney Avenue. So pick up the phone, give us a call, or go online. We'd love to hear from you. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished guest speakers for this morning. We have Sean Keating from RSM. Sean will be talking taxes. Sean's been with us for many years. I think he's going on his 5th year, if I'm not mistaken, and we're very pleased to have him back again this year. And new to the event, we have Dr. Sten Vermund. He's the Dean of the Yale School of Public Health, and we're very fortunate to have Dr. Vermund with us this morning with so many questions around this trying pandemic. And finally, and last but not least, we have John Traynor. He's an Executive Vice President. He's the Chief Investment Officer at People's United Bank, and John's returned to share his perspective on the economy, and he shares his economic outlooks throughout our footprint and beyond, for that matter. So thank you, John, for being with us again today, and I think everybody's in for a real treat. I think that's about it, so I'm going to send it back to you, Garrett. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Kevin. We appreciate it. And again, thank you to People's United Bank for your support of this event. I also want to take a moment to thank our other sponsors that are supporting us here today. RSM is our speaker sponsor, and we'll hear from Sean Keating, as Kevin was just mentioning. We'll hear from him shortly. He also does a great job giving us that outlook on all tax issues every year. Also, we want to thank New Haven Lawn Club, our event sponsor. Normally, we would be at the New Haven Lawn Club, and it pains us not to be there. I know it's so beautiful this time of year, especially. Our creative media sponsor is Story Reel Studios. They put together that opening video, and thank you to both the guys over there. Great job with that. We appreciate it. And of course, New Haven Register, our media sponsor. Now, the Chamber has been able to provide all of this valuable resources, content, because of the help of our annual investors. And I just want to take a moment to thank each of the companies that you see appearing on the slides before you. Their support is always appreciated, but this year it was so much more impactful for us here at the Chamber. These companies are our regional leaders in many ways, including their support of the business community. It's now my pleasure to introduce Scott Bassett, a partner at RSM and also a member of the Chamber Board, who will introduce Sean Keating. Scott, good morning.
Good morning, Garrett. I think I have my video on, and if you can see me. Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce my partner and friend, Sean Keating. Sean is a partner at RSM, has over 19 years of experience in taxation, accounting, and business consulting experiences. He's developed a diverse background in tax planning and compliance for closely held businesses, corporations, partnerships, and individuals. Sean has a vast amount of experience, which range from industries including manufacturing, wholesale distribution, technology, and professional services. Specifically, Sean leads growth initiatives for business and professional services, not only here in our Connecticut offices, but also he's a national tax leader for that industry. What I like about Sean is he represents everything that we believe here in RSM. Sean brings an unmatched client-centric focus to every client. Sean builds rich, enduring relationships, and most importantly, he listens so he understands our clients. On a personal side, Sean's not only a busy tax partner, but also a busy dad. He has 2 children, the ages of 7 and 9, He resides in Milford. And he also is very active in the board of directors, where he currently is chair for the ALS Association Connecticut chapter. Please welcome my friend and my partner, Sean Keating, as he leads the discussion on the implications of 2021 tax and beyond. Thanks, Sean. Over to you.
Great, thanks, Scott. I appreciate the introduction, and I'm very happy to be back here again this year with everybody. And again, as Garrett said, unfortunately we can't be in the beautiful lawn club this time of year, but still happy to be able to get together and talk about the important things that are going on, in our economy, in our state, and from my perspective, especially, as it pertains to tax. Now, as we get started, and I do have a slide deck. I'm not sure how to share it in this virtual environment, but really what I want to go through and go over this morning is really to cover, where have we been in the last 12 months as we've all tried to deal with the challenges of COVID. Where are we now and what's going on currently with the results of elections, and as we try to plan and look forward, what's next? What's next for federal tax policy? But what's also next for the state of Connecticut, and what should we be thinking about in our state as it pertains to taxes? So as we get started here, let's see if I can't share my presentation. So, as I mentioned, I do want to start with the response to COVID-19. This was a very different year, and I think we've all had to adapt. As I look back over the year, I think we had to help a lot of our clients, not only with tax issues, but how do they find liquidity? What are the programs they could take advantage of? And, thankfully, as we did get into the midst of the pandemic in the spring, we did have some assistance from our federal government. So, that legislative response really came in the form of the Families First Corona Response Act and the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or as many of you know it as the CARES Act. And this was really looking to provide payroll tax credits, helping small businesses. And then there was also a fair amount of tax regulations, both federal and state, really to help with cash flow and when we filed returns and made payments. I'm not going to focus on the latter because that's kind of already passed, but I did want to go over a little bit of what was part of the Family First and the CARES Act, so that people are aware and can take advantage, if they haven't already, of some of the programs. Now, again, the Family First Act really gave us mandatory paid leave for certain employees, qualified paid sick leave, qualified health plan wages. And as we look at that, I think it's limited to employers with fewer than 500 employees, and there really needed to be some ability not to work, leave based on COVID, many restrictions around this, and really pertinent to just certain situations where you had employees that really were impacted by the virus and could not work. But then we move over to the CARES Act, which I think was a little bit more robust and really gave us a variety of tax items to try to help. One of the main ones there that I'll talk about in a little bit more detail, because it might be applicable to this group, to the small businesses that are out there struggling, is the employee retention credit. And then we also saw a delay of payment of employer payroll taxes, expanded net operating loss carryback opportunities. And when we think about liquidity and businesses trying to find liquidity through taxes, if you had a few good years in 2014, 2015, 2016, the current tax code after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act would have prohibited you from carrying back your losses that you generated in 2019 and 2020. Part of the CARES Act is to allow those losses from 2019 and 2020 to be carried back for 5 years. So that could be a great way to look at liquidity if you haven't. At the individual level, there was suspension of the excess business loss limitation rules that came about from the TCAJ. We saw some loosening around the limitations and an interest expense, the 163(j) limitation that came out of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And we also saw a technical correction to the qualified improvement property, which again, if you've done any work, leasehold improvements, qualified restaurant improvements, there was a technical glitch in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and you were not allowed, those assets were to be depreciated over 40 years. Now with this fix, if you've done certain types of improvements over the last, from 2018 to now, you can go back and amend returns and make some changes and take advantage of those improvements that you've been depreciating for 40 years and essentially take an immediate deduction through bonus depreciation. So again, if you've had any significant leasehold build outs or improvements, another area that you'd want to look at to potentially find some liquidity. Now, again, as I mentioned, the employee retention credit, it's a credit equal to 50% of the qualified wages. It's generally offset against the employer's portion of Social Security tax. If the credit happens to exceed that, it can become refundable. And it's eligible. There's different qualifications and limitations on this based on how many employees a company has. Generally, it's easier when you have fewer than 100. I think I've seen small businesses take the most advantage of this because there's also some requirements in there that you've experienced a greater than 50% reduction in gross receipts, or you've really been limited and have had to shut down. I will say many of my clients, although they've had many struggles with liquidity, have not quite seen that 50% or a greater reduction, in their gross receipts. However, I think small businesses are probably more greatly impacted on this and not being able to be open, during the pandemic. So I think small businesses, if you haven't looked at, if you've been shut down, employees have not been able to work, you've had a reduction in your gross income, or I really think you should be talking to your advisor or your payroll company about the employee retention credit if you haven't already. Employer payroll tax deduction, I think this was good for larger taxpayers who didn't avail themselves of the PPP, and essentially it's a deferral of the employer portion of Social Security. However, if you did receive a payroll protection program loan, you're not eligible for this program. And now those are those are the tax items that have changed with the CARES Act that allowed to get some employee credits. To try to find some liquidity through loss carrybacks. But then obviously also part of the CARES Act, we had increased access to loans for small and middle market businesses. We may not think of this as a tax issue. However, it did seem that in the months of April and May, I think a lot of accounting folks and tax folks found themselves becoming SBA loan specialists and trying to help our banking community, through that crush in that process and to just help clients figure out and businesses figure out, what it all meant. What were all of the hurdles? What were the different payroll requirements? How could they meet, all of the qualifications they needed to? And really out of the three loans, the three liquidity sources that we have up, I don't have many businesses that have engaged with the Main Street Lending Facility. Some of my smaller clients did immediately go for the SBA EIDL loan, but many of them rolled that into the Paycheck Protection Program loan. And I think that's the one that we've seen taken advantage of most fully, in terms of helping businesses stay open. Now, when we look a little bit forward into that and we look at PPP, there's still questions, and there's still big questions that impact taxpayers, especially as we're looking at liquidity as we come into year end. So when we think about the payroll protection program loans, the biggest question that comes up is, are those loan proceeds that are forgiven taxable? And these could be big numbers depending on the size of the loan that you've taken. There was a notice 2020-32 in May that essentially said from the IRS that these loans, if they are forgiven, because you economically did not come out of pocket for the money, you therefore don't get to take the deduction. In other words, those forgiven loan proceeds are taxable. Many in Congress have said that was not the intent. The IRS says, well, you did not make that clear, and we apply tax law principles, and this is where it comes out that is taxable. I think many businesses at least had hope that they can defer that tax burden into 2021 when their loans are actually forgiven. Unfortunately, in November and about right before Thanksgiving, Treasury gave us a Thanksgiving gift to say, no, you have to, you must disallow those deductions if you, in the year incurred, if you reasonably expect the loan to be forgiven. So now not only do we have loans that were there to help businesses through this difficult time, but now we're coming into year end and they're needing to deal with a tax burden that they may not have thought they had, and that brings about other liquidity issues. Now, as I said, I think Congress's intent here was for this to be a non-taxable item and really to give businesses that double benefit and not have a tax tail that bites it. So, is there still a possibility that that tax treatment will change on the PPP loans? And I think the good news here is, stay tuned. It seems that every year when I do this, presentation in December, there seems to be something out there that's not settled and certain at the time. I think 2 years ago, we were just getting the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act before I spoke. And this year we're waiting on the big thing is, in this new round of stimulus that's being talked about in Congress at the moment, is there a possibility the treatment of the PPP loans will change? The good news in that is there does seem to be bipartisan support. There's a lot of lobbying from the business community, from the AICPA. The Democrats did have this in their proposal at the beginning of the week. The Senate Republicans did not, but last night I did read through some of the details of the White House proposal, and it is back in to make the proceeds from these loans non-taxable. And that's another big thing, I think, as we watched in the introduction video, and I won't get too much into the PPP loan and stimulus, and we'll focus mainly in tax, but we do have a new round of stimulus being talked about, that hopefully will include another round of PPP loans to help kind of our small businesses, make it through the next couple seasons. So I think that's really where we've been over the last 9 months, and it's been a very interesting 9 months as we've kind of dealt with this and what those impacts were and finding liquidity for businesses. But now as we move into the end of the year, the focus has really been around the elections and, what does that mean from a tax policy standpoint? What can we expect in the coming years? And as we look at that and we look at going into the election, we had a couple different possibilities. We could have had the blue wave everybody expected, or we could have had that mixed Senate, Congress, president. Now, if we had that sweep in scenario one, I think we would have had a lot more likelihood in terms of seeing some sort of large tax reform in the next 2 years. As it is, we're coming into a divided Senate. We're still waiting for the 2 runoff elections in Georgia. I'll try to say this is not to be a controversial statement, but presumably we have Joe Biden as the president-elect. Now, when we look at this race in Georgia and we think about if the Republicans win and maintain control of the Senate, then I think we can definitely see tax reform and the tax changes that the Biden administration would like to make will most likely not pass in any of the forms that they like. And really, I think even if the Democrats were to win those 2 Senate seats, you still have a very narrow majority, Democrat majority in the Senate, and you've got a mix of moderates and progressive Democrats within there. And what is the likelihood they are going to be able to agree on major tax policy changes? I really think in the next 2 years we're probably going to see a little bit more in terms of maybe some rate increases. I think given the deficit and the spending, there may be a little bit of support in that in both parties. But generally, as we can see, and I won't go through Biden's tax plan in detail, but I think the overall gist here is that it's looking to raise tax rates, corporate tax rates, individual tax rates, looking to increase the estate tax and the exemptions. And increasing that estate tax again. So really we see, Biden administration coming in with their tax changes generally around, raising rates both domestically and on global income. But as I said, we have this mixed Senate. We don't know that they're going to be able to push the policies through that they would like. So given that, what should we expect in the next 2 years? I think we've one of the things that we do expect to see, because we know that President-elect Biden and his administration will want to fund the programs they want to fund, and without the ability to raise taxes, it will be interesting to see what type of agenda the Treasury sets as when we get a new leader of the Treasury. And I think that the area that we will see and taxpayers should be prepared for is really increased enforcement activity. I think the IRS is going to be looking to raise revenue in any way they can, and absent tax policy change, I do think that that's where we're going to be seeing, much of the activity. And this really has planning implications. Regardless of what we think is going to happen in the next 2 years, rates, I think most taxpayers at the moment, as they look to planning, feel that rates are historically low, and there's really nowhere that they can go but up. So, contrary to what we normally see in tax planning, I do see a lot of businesses and a lot of clients looking to accelerate income into this year, as opposed to deferring it to take advantage of what they see as historically low rates. Now, as I said, as we look at future tax policy, I think it's going to be difficult to get a negotiated outcome on any tax matters in 2021. In 2022, we're going to come into a midterm election. Historically, we don't see tax rates changes or increases in an election year. And depending really on what happens in midterm elections, I think that's when we reset and take another look at the possibility of tax reform. So with that, I did want to take a few moments now to talk about state issues and a little bit about Connecticut in particular, as we look at this, through our tax lens. And, in dealing with the pandemic, I think every year when we come and talk, states have generally been in a difficult position. I think last year I might have been here talking about 15 or 20 out of the 50 states being in the red, and that number has just grown. Many states are seeing enormous budget challenges, a projected 200 to 600 billion combined state and local revenue shortfall over the next 2 years, and that's if recovery starts now. States, as opposed to the federal government, generally have constitutional requirements to have a balanced budget, and 48 of the 50 states do have that requirement. So they don't quite have the flexibility of the federal government to help businesses through tax cuts and tax policy changes. And the spending cuts, fiscal magic, and using rainy day funds is not necessarily going to be able to close this gap. And what does that really mean as we talk about taxes in a multi-state environment? I think one, that means we have to be very paying attention to the rate changes in other states if we have a multi-state workforce. And then really look to see if there's any tax increases coming. We've already started to see those. And then you're also going to see, again, on the state side, much like the federal government side, increased enforcement. And you're also starting to see some infighting amongst states. I think a great example of that is, Massachusetts and New Hampshire. As Massachusetts went into the shutdown, they passed a law saying that you still needed to withhold taxes on employees who may be working in another state now, but previously worked in a Massachusetts office. That did not sit well with New Hampshire. Many of their residents commute into Massachusetts, and New Hampshire will live free or die. So they said, you will not tax our residents if they are not within your state working. You don't have jurisdiction. They did bring that fight. That case is being brought directly to the Supreme Court. In other states where we have metropolitan areas where employees are now moving to work from home in the suburbs, those fights are going to get set up. New Jersey also, hinted that they may sue New York. much in the vein of New Hampshire and Massachusetts. So we're waiting to see how some of that plays out as well. So there's definitely some confusion or uncertainty, I should say, within the states in the issues that we're going to face there. Just around our region, we know New Jersey has a 1.6 billion shortfall. They've raised their rates on their highest earners and have suspended changes to their surtaxes. Again, New York is in trouble and facing a large budget gap. They're decoupling from some of the benefits that the federal government was giving to be able to continue to maintain revenue. And then we look at Connecticut. And I think that Connecticut has an interesting story this year. I was sitting here in my office about 6 months ago, and a colleague of mine from another state in the Northeast called. And this was one of the period of time in the summer when Connecticut had some of the best numbers and was doing very well in regards to the pandemic. And they said, how does it feel for Connecticut to finally be number one in something positive? And I think that really is the story here, is that in the past, we've had a lot of outward migration from Connecticut. Is a unfriendly tax place to live, unfriendly towards businesses. But now with the pandemic, we see a lot of movement back into Connecticut. It's all of a sudden become a maybe not so bad, maybe a great place to work again. Anecdotally, I live in Milford. I have 2 new neighbors, and they both moved up from New York, and they're lovely couples, and we're happy to have them in our community. But that's the movement that we're seeing of people and tax base. So, Connecticut, we also have a budget gap. We've been using the rainy day fund. We do seem to be in better position than other states at the moment. The 2021 budget has no new taxes. And there are some potential, revenue raisers in the proposed budget, really delaying some of the, corporate surcharge and capital-based taxes that are set to expire. So, again, I think the big question is, how does Connecticut take advantage of the changes in the current environment? Again, as we see this migration of people into Connecticut, that upper middle class workforce, how do we keep them here and start to change the story within our state? And I think there is some uncertainty around that in terms of what the best way forward is. We see, the Republican Senate coming in and asking Governor Lamont to suspend the half a percent payroll tax to fund the FMLA program. I think Governor Lamont has come out and said, no, absolutely not. We need that more than ever. And we're also still hearing, and I talked about this last year, a potential payroll tax, really to work around the state and local tax limitations. And that is a very interesting one, in that it sounds great on paper, but the way that it would have to mechanically work, employees would be made whole at the end of the day, but on paper they look like they made less. And we really have to ask ourselves, does that help Connecticut remain competitive when we're trying to attract talent from other states? If we have these types of payroll taxes, are we able to present ourselves as competitive in terms of wages and getting people to come to Connecticut and work? So I think we're in a unique position right now. And in terms of tax policy, I think we need to just make sure that we're not doing anything that may make us a business unfriendly state. And my closing comments in terms of state taxes really is, when you look at your businesses, if you're a multi-state business, you've probably been trying to keep the lights on, keep the orders moving. But in the meantime, you've had employees that may have worked in a particular office or state, now working from home, working in other states. And I think now, as you come into year end, it's really important to get a handle on where are your people and where have they moved and what issues has that caused for you. We've seen a great movement of people. In fact, at RSM, we've come out with a tracker, a survey to send to employees to figure out where they're going, where they are, and to look at that in an interactive way of where state tax opportunities and risks may be. And with that, I will turn it back over to Garrett.
Sean, thank you so much. Great job. We do have just a minute or two for questions. So if anyone wants to put a question in the chat, and we'll also have Sean stick around at the end for questions too. Sean, just one quick one. As far as deadlines, obviously December 31st is always a huge deadline for if you're going to make any tax changes, especially I'm guessing if you want to do the employer retention tax credit. And also, I guess, just in people sitting in limbo waiting to see what Congress will do, if that should impact any of the decisions that they may need to make before the end of this year.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, Garrett. I mean, I do think there's a few things as we come into the end of the year that are becoming important. You know, I do think that if you have not looked at some of the payroll tax credits that were available, the retention credit, you know, that you've had shutdowns or significant reductions in your business, that you are talking to your tax advisor and your payroll tax provider as well to make sure that you're taking advantage of those. It's really only covered through the end of the year. You know, I think the other place that I didn't talk much about is looking at estate planning. I think for individuals, you know, taxes are low, estate taxes are low, limitations are high. You know, it's a really good time that you should be reviewing your estate tax plan as well and making some of those moves if possible before the end of the year. And then, you know, lastly, Garrett, I think for my corporate clients and my corporate taxpayers, but also for partnerships that are coming into the end of the year, you know, one of their biggest questions right now is around the taxability of this PPP loan. You know, do I need to be making a large cash outlay for my, you know, fourth quarter estimated tax payment in December or January, or can I really hold that money as I head into this you know, winter, spring season where I expect some uncertainty and really want to have that cash in my pocket to be able to pay my expenses and my employees. So, you know, that's really the big decision is, do we think that the PPP is going to be excluded from tax, and can I keep this money that I would otherwise need to pay in taxes within my cash account? So, you know, I think from a tax perspective, that's causing a lot of anxiety. I've had a lot of those conversations this week, and we're all kind of patiently waiting for, you know, for Congress and our government to do something around that, because I think people do need some certainty on that before the end of the year. I think would be extremely helpful.
Yeah, patiently, the key word as we wait for word from Washington as to whether anything will happen, but it's so needed for so many, especially of our small businesses, yeah. But just for certainty, as you mentioned. So
yeah, I think that's been a big challenge this year is uncertainty in, you know, how these loans get administered, how do I get forgiven, what information do I, you know, there has been a bit of a burden on taxpayers to really track and understand what's going on. You know, I think it has been an interesting year, and I think patience is one of the words of 2020 at this point when it comes to tax and tax policy.
That's for sure. Well, Sean, thank you. I know if you can stick around at the end, we'll bring you back up for some more Q&A. Sean Keating with RSM, a great job this morning talking about tax policy. And we all know the economic recovery cannot occur until we have a health recovery. Then we'll have a real lasting economic, hopefully, boom. And we're honored to be joined this morning by Sten Vermund, the Anna M.R. Lauder Professor of Public Health and Dean at the Yale School of Public Health. Sten, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're on the line, and make sure that your video is able to work here. We appreciate you taking the time. And I know the School of Public Health has been at the center and has been a global leader during the pandemic. Talk to us a little bit this morning about where the virus is at, the rollout of the vaccine, and when we might start to see things change in a positive sense.
Well, thank goodness you didn't ask me about tax policy or trends, because Sean would have been a hard act to follow. But thanks for asking about something I know in my profession. So for those of you on the line who don't know me, I'm a pediatrician and I'm an infectious disease epidemiologist. So with wearing those two hats, it's been a busy time. The COVID-19 was certainly an immense challenge for our state in March and April, and the governor had no choice but to tackle this through essentially a lockdown. I know that there are folks in the business community who are mad, but we did not have a handle on it, and we had historic death rates, unprecedented in March, April, May. We also filled our ICU beds such that the Yale New Haven Hospital had to redeploy 2 entire floors of our cancer center for extra ICU beds. We've never come even close to having the number of people on ventilators that we had, and the same story at Greenwich Hospital, Bridgeport, the University of Connecticut, et cetera. So it's unfortunate that we have a second surge now after a pretty successful summer, where the reopening of the state was reasonably successful at many levels. But it seems that people have COVID fatigue. They get tired of wearing their masks. They let their guard down when they're in family gatherings. I mean, why should I wear a mask at Thanksgiving with Aunt Julia and Uncle George? The reality is that people just feel comfortable in family settings. And we've had a lot of family small group outbreaks. It's hard to keep the students down. We had that big super spreader event in the Anthony's Ocean restaurant in New Haven. Over 300 students at Quinnipiac, for example, seem to be linked to that one party. So this is happening in restaurant outbreaks. It's happening in sports events and sports team outbreaks. So we are fueling the epidemic spread again in our state. Nowhere near as bad as the South North Dakota, Wisconsin, Texas, but still it's been disappointing. And we're hoping that we can reestablish a handle on this around classic public health control measures. Until we have vaccine access, we're pretty much stuck with the classic approaches that we're very familiar with in respiratory virus control. And we know what they are from the flu influenza world, and also a bacterium, namely tuberculosis. And they're everything that everybody on this call knows: masks, physical distancing, hand, face, and surface hygiene, outdoor activities, which is tough when it's freezing outside, small groups, and indoor air quality. And most of you in your companies and businesses have called your HVAC folks and said, look, how can I improve the indoor air quality? How can I more effectively filter my air so that I can get back to work? I can keep my customers safe. I can keep my employees safe. And I thought I'd just spend a couple of words on that for the subset of you who maybe haven't had that conversation with your HVAC supplier. What we can do is we can increase the number of circulations per hour, just like an airplane does. If you're circulating air three air exchange per hour, if you can ramp that up to 6, that will substantially improve safety of your air. If you have your old filters and you're changing them periodically, if you can upgrade to a MERV 13 filter, that then will massively improve the efficiency of clearing virus from your air, should an asymptomatic person walk into your store or into your company. Also mixing outside air into your HVAC system. In the wintertime, 10 to 20%, in the summertime, anywhere from 50 to 100%. It's not as energy efficient, but unfortunately, we have to spend a little more on energy this year to keep ourselves and our employees and customers safe. And we've got details on this on our website in the School of Public Health. If you'd be interested, just search for ventilation, Yale School of Public Health, and you'll find us right away. The other piece of this is the testing. We are in much better shape today than we were back in the spring in terms of access to testing. And it's very plausible that you can utilize testing for your own employees in your own business. If you were to have them tested weekly, you can have an early warning sign of an asymptomatic case, and you can quickly lock that down. We're testing our Yale undergraduates twice a week. So we're making a huge investment in trying to nip a transmission cycle in the bud. And we've done an amazing job. I mean, we've been able to stay open as a university for the fall semester, and we hope to do the same in the spring semester. Other universities have not been so fortunate because they haven't had those testing protocols in place, and they haven't been quite as aggressive in student education and trying to manage risk. If there's some sad consequences, like the sports persons who have not been able to play competitive sports in the Ivy League, but we think that's a reasonable price to pay to keep our academics safe and open. And then finally, vaccines. So it's fantastic what's happened with the science of the vaccines. That spike protein that you're all familiar with, turns out if you have antibodies to that spike protein, you are going to neutralize virus. And that means that it's more like measles or mumps rather than HIV or respiratory syncytial virus. We've been trying to get vaccines for HIV for 40 years. We've been trying to get vaccines for respiratory syncytial virus for 60 years and have failed in both accounts. So there are tough bugs where the immunology of response to those bugs is not favorable for vaccine development. And then there are easy bugs where if, like hepatitis B, if you have the hepatitis B surface antigen and develop an antibody against it, you're protected. And so coronavirus is more like hepatitis B and more like measles, mumps, German measles, et cetera, for which we've been able to mount very successful vaccines. So we're really, really lucky that the novel coronavirus was an easy vaccine to develop. Now, the modern technologies of vaccines have developed a whole array of types of vaccines. And guess what? They're probably all going to work because they've all been targeting an immune response to the spike protein. And since it worked for the first couple of vaccines, it's probably going to work for all of them. Now, it may work to different extents and safety factors may differ. It may be that there's certain vaccines that are grand slam home runs and other vaccines that are only a double or a single, or maybe we don't even want to deploy them because there may be some safety concerns. So there's a long way to go in the research effort before we have a full picture of which vaccines are actually going to end up in the arms of millions of people. But these first two vaccines, the Moderna RNA vaccine and the Pfizer RNA vaccine, those look terrific. And we've never had RNA vaccines before. This is the first time that technology has been developed. And what happens is the RNA gets into the cell and starts instructing the cell's machinery to produce antibodies against the spike protein. And so the cells become little antibody factories. And then when we actually see the virus, we've already got cells that recognize that virus and they start producing this antibody very quickly. And that's how we're protected. So it doesn't have to integrate into the, many of you are familiar with RNA vaccines like HIV, where it has to have a reverse transcriptase to produce the second strand and create DNA, and then it integrates with host genome. Vaccine doesn't work that way. It doesn't have to integrate at all. So there's no risk of oncogenesis, of creating a cancer cell because you've disrupted the integrity of the host genome. There's no risk of that at all. This looks very, very safe. The side effects are a little bit of a sore arm, little ice pack and you're fine. So we're really, really fortunate to have these two vaccines. However, there are only 30 million doses in the can, so to speak, and that's only going to vaccinate 15 million people since you need two doses for full effect. We're wondering if maybe one dose is enough, but the FDA has approved 2 doses because that's what the trials were based on. And so, there are 320 million Americans, probably 220 million of whom are willing to get a vaccine, and we can only vaccinate 15 million of them. So don't hold your breath that the vaccine is going to transform our business circumstances in the state of Connecticut in the next 6-8 months. Next summer, next fall, they may deploy tens of millions of more vaccine, and it may get down to beyond the core of the frontline health workers and the nursing home residents who are on tap to get the first vaccines. But to start vaccinating ourselves, our children, school teachers, employees, we're going to have 100 million more, 200 million more vaccine out there, and that's going to take quite a while to develop. Furthermore, we didn't buy all the vaccine that was available to us. That was a federal government decision, and therefore a lot of that vaccine is going to other countries, which is fine. They need it too. But if we'd been more clever, we would have made a bigger advanced purchase. But I guess we were hedging our bets that maybe the vaccine wouldn't work. I don't know. I wasn't part of those discussions. So I am optimistic that the end of 2021 is going to have a transformative opportunity. My colleagues and I are working very hard on vaccine messaging. We're going to have to get past the vaccine hesitancy that has been such a plague for us in getting proper vaccination rates. There are many communities that don't want to get vaccinated. They may think that that this is a government plot and that nobody should force them to get vaccinated, and they don't want to get vaccinated. That kind of is an argument that sometimes comes from the right. They may not want a foreign protein and unnatural product to enter the arm of their child or themselves. That's an argument that sometimes comes from the left. And they may be suspicious of a government program because there are community dynamics that make them think that this is something harmful, and that can come from any side of the political spectrum. So those of us in public health are not on, characterizing this as political. We want the Republicans, the Democrats, we want the capitalists and the socialists all to join forces to support vaccination, because that's what's going to get our economy back on track, get people back employed, get these profit margins to the point where people can be hired, and restore integrity to our business community and to our economic prosperity. So I'm hoping you'll all be allies in encouraging maximum vaccination once those vaccines become available, because then we can achieve herd immunity. If we can get to 70, 80%, then we can reduce transmission and drop the number of new coronavirus cases to a matter of dozens a month instead of tens of thousands a month. So thanks for your attention. Happy to take any questions.
And thanks, Sten. And we can take a couple of questions from the chat. And I also want to bring in John Traynor. John is Chief Investment Officer and Executive Vice President for People's United Bank. And John's going to start in a moment, but I thought I'd bring in John while Sten was still on the line. And Sten, John's going to give our economic outlook. And John, I don't know if you need to change what you were going to say, or if it's right in line with what Sten was talking about.
No, I think he made a great presentation. In fact, I'm excited. There's a lot of momentum going on, so that was a great presentation. Great presentation. Did you want me to start, or did you want to have a question for Sten?
Let's just see if we have any questions out there.
Since we don't have any questions, why don't Anna end with one more comment, something I forgot to say, which is that death rates have fallen. So obviously we're in a mess right now. We had the most deaths in the United States that we've ever had yesterday, over 3,000 deaths. But that's because of the number of cases has ballooned. I mentioned COVID fatigue and, Sturgis motorcycle rallies and political rallies and, Hanukkah parties. I mean, unless we take this thing kind of seriously and really double down on classic public health control strategies, we're going to continue with increasing the number of cases. But the good news is we have reduced mortality rates because we're much better at taking care of patients. There are all sorts of strategies in the clinic, in the hospital, that we do differently now than we did in the spring. We don't have time to go into them all, but anticoagulants, positioning of patients, trying to delay patients going into ventilators. Remdesivir might be helping. It's hard to tell. Certainly the steroids are helping. So if you do have a loved one who does end up in the hospital with coronavirus, they have a much better chance of surviving now than they did 6 months ago. So I thought that would be a final upbeat comment to leave you all and move on to John.
Thank you, Dean Vermund. We appreciate you joining us, and thank you for the information. It is hopeful that we are near the end, but still a lot of work for all of us to do to be able to get there. Thank you again.
All right, brilliant. I see some messages on the chat. I'm going to try to answer them in text. All right, thanks.
Thank you. And John, take it away. We're excited to hear what you think for the economic outlook for 2021.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Garrett, and congratulations on putting this event together. And I'm going to echo Sean's comments. Getting together with everyone in the Lawn Club is probably one of the most spectacular venues I get to speak in. So hopefully this time next year we'll all be together again. If you take a look at my slides, I'm going to go through them fairly quickly and try and weave a presentation that includes Sean's comments and Dr. Vermund's comments into the presentation. If you look at that first page there, page 2, where I've got the picture of Joe Biden, the key issues that and he's got one heck of a job ahead of him, but from the economy, the taxes, the financial markets, and then manufacturing, that's what I want to focus. So if you turn to page 3, you'll see the 3 big areas that we think are going to dominate the headlines in 2021. Number 1, as you just heard, the COVID vaccine. If you think about our economy, services and manufacturing, 70% of our economy is services. Now, normally when we go into a recession, services are the shock absorber. You might not go out if you're nervous about your job. You might not go out and buy a car, but you'll still take your family out to dinner. You might go to a movie. Well, the exact opposite happened this year. Services took the big hit. Manufacturing actually was able to weather this storm fairly well. In fact, some of our clients have actually had booming years. If they're providing defense equipment, if they're providing medical equipment, they've been doing very, very well. Services business has been decimated, and that's really where the damage has taken place in our economy. For the service businesses to turn around, we need a vaccine. People have to be confident that they can go out. They can go into an enclosed space in a restaurant. They can go out and meet with people. That's not going to happen until we get the vaccine. So we hope we see that service rebound really start to take place in the second half of this year. From a confidence standpoint, confidence is going to flow from that corona vaccine. If you think about where we were, we lost 22 million jobs. We've regained 12, but we still have 10 million people in this country that, lost their job. They were completely blindsided. There was really no warning to this recession. So it was really a shock to the system. And what it's done is it's slowed business capital spending, except if you're spending on technology. A lot of firms are out there, they're building up their online presence, but we've seen a dramatic drop-off in capital spending. So we need consumers to be confident. That's only going to come from a coronavirus vaccine and wide adoption of that vaccine, as we just heard. And businesses need that confidence to get out and spend. And then from a congressional standpoint, from a political standpoint, we believe and we're, the market seems to be thinking that we're probably going to have, whether both elections down in Georgia go to the Republicans or just one, the market seems to be betting that we're going to have maybe 51-49 in the Republicans, Democrats in the Senate. That could actually lead to a very strong, and even more successful presidency for Joe Biden. If you think back to the 1990s, the first 2 years of President Clinton's administration, when he had a Democrat House and a Democrat Senate, the market was flat. There was, fighting. We had the healthcare debates. Once the Republicans took the House in 1994, President Clinton's administration was incredibly successful. The markets did well. So divided government, as long as we've got people that are, adults in the room, can actually be fairly successful. So we're keeping our fingers crossed with the Biden administration. If you turn the page, the next two charts are charts that I know I've shown you over the last couple of years. The first one is the leading economic index. And I know I told you, if you take a look at this, normally it gives us about a 12 to an 18-month heads up as to when the next recession is taking place. If you look at this, this was not the leading index. We got no warning from this index, and it just shows you how unique this recession was this year. What we do like about this chart is that you see where it bottomed, and it was basically a V bottom. Even though it didn't give us a good indication of the coming recession, we do think it's giving us a very good indication as to the rebound, and we think it's sustainable. If you take a look at the next chart, the average hourly earnings, I know I've shown you this chart the last few years, and I've said once we get up to 3.5%, 4%, the Fed starts getting worried about inflation. Well, if you take a look at this chart, we had a phenomenal spike. And you'd probably look at this chart and think, boy, that's fantastic. We had wage growth go through the roof, and we didn't have inflation. Well, the bad side of this chart is that the people that lost their jobs, the people that really suffered in this recession were the low-wage workers. Think about the waiters and waitresses in the restaurants and the people, the housekeeping staff and all the hotels. The low-wage workers suffered. So what this chart is telling you is that low-wage workers suffered, and it was the high-wage workers that held their jobs. So we actually want to see this line come down, and if you see, it was about 4.5% in October. We just got the latest number for November, and it was 4.4%. A positive chart, a positive average hourly earnings chart, I'd love to see this come back down below 4%. I'd love to see it come back down below 3.5%. We need to see this line go down. So just to give you one stat, if you drew a line in this country at $60,000 in wages, people that make more than $60,000, since January of this year, their employment compared to January earlier this year is actually higher today than it was earlier this year. So if you're making more than $60,000, employment is good. You're probably in pretty good shape. Low-wage workers, all right, the people that I just talked about, their jobs compared to where they were in January are still down, even after the rebound, still down 20%. So this really has been a very, very vicious recession for, again, the low-wage workers, and it's hit women much harder than men, and it's really, I'm sure a lot of your family members might be suffering. So we really do need that fiscal stimulus, as Sean was talking about. If you take a look at the next two pages, I just wanted to give you a little perspective as to how this year progressed. Page 6 has the June forecast from the OECD for global GDP growth. And if you take a look at that blue line down there at the bottom, the dotted line, you'll see that the big fear back in June was a double dip, that we would have a rebound in the third quarter, but that we would roll right back over and have a double dip. Well, if you turn the page and look at where the forecasts were in September, just 3 months later, that double dip was gone. So the confidence in not only the U.S. rebound, but a global economic rebound increased dramatically. And right now, the forecast for fourth quarter, a little north of 2%. So we should have a very good fourth quarter. If you turn the page, I've got two charts there that were in the same issue of The Economist, and I just thought they really told they juxtaposed the situation with the coronavirus very, very well. The chart on the left shows the increasing infections, which we just heard from Dr. Vermund. I mean, we've seen this, and unfortunately, those lines are going to be going higher. What we are seeing also, and Garrett, you may be seeing this with the Chamber of Commerce, this chart on business formations goes back to 2006. Look at the incredible spike that the Department of Commerce has seen in new business formations. I'm seeing it in my own town. Businesses. There was a new sub shop that just opened up in Fairfield. I mean, a husband and wife saw a space open up, and they jumped on it, and they just opened up a new restaurant that they've always thought about starting. So we're seeing new business formation. This hopefully will be the seed corn for the recovery that we see in 2021 and 2022. If you turn the page, I won't go over all of the numbers. Page 9, our economic forecast. There's only one number that I really want to focus on, and that's our GDP forecast for next year. We're estimating 3.7% growth. Implicit in that forecast is basically $1 trillion in fiscal stimulus. And it's being debated right now, a $900 billion package. So if we get that, we think we'll see good growth next year in the 3.7% range. If let's say, there is some negotiations and that package goes up to $1.5 trillion, I'd probably raise our GDP forecast up to 4.3%. If we got the true trillion, remember Nancy Pelosi was pushing for $2 trillion just a few months ago, we'd probably be up close 4.8, maybe even 5%. Now that's good, but what we'd be doing is actually pulling some GDP growth forward from the subsequent year, 2022. If you buy a car in 2021 that you are planning to buy the next year, well, you don't need to buy another car in 2022. So, we're banking on about $1 trillion in fiscal stimulus. We need that, especially for those low-wage workers. So the conclusion is, if you turn to my virtuous cycle versus sugar rush, last year when I showed you this, I had the check mark next to sugar rush. If we're correct about our forecast for 2022, we actually think we could get onto a virtuous cycle, a rebounding economy. If the service side of the economy improves, we'll get more employment. We'll rehire those 10 million workers. Wages, consumer confidence, increased spending, we could get onto that virtuous cycle, which could give us several years of good growth. So that's what we're looking for. For the manufacturers on the call, I put in a couple of slides on manufacturing, and you saw the latest ISM data, which was very, very encouraging. It was down slightly, but still a very good number. If you take a look at that chart on the bottom there, manufacturing is expanding, and we're still at a very good level. What gets us excited, though, if you turn the page and take a look at inventories, page 12, and I apologize for the blurriness of the charts. I couldn't find anything a little bit sharper, but that darker line on the top slide, that's service inventory. The bottom line is manufacturing inventory, and then the bottom chart is small business inventory. All of those charts tell us that inventories are actually fairly low and that we could see a pretty good restocking cycle as we enter into 2021. So we think manufacturing has got a little bit of wind at our back. One of the things that we've talked about, though, with a lot of our clients is that because of the supply shocks, especially with supply chains going to China, some of them are moving from a just-in-time management where they keep inventories very lean to a just-in-case inventory management where you might see businesses actually start to say, you know what, I need to maintain higher inventories. So we're going to keep an eye on that because certainly we want to understand the profitability dynamics of a lot of our clients. But just in conversations with them, we've seen that a bunch of firms are saying we need to maintain higher inventories because we're still a little unsure about our supply chain. And then the last chart I've got on manufacturing basically is a good chart for me. That generally when the PMI is at this level, it forecasts pretty good returns on the S&P 500 going forward. So that's a real positive. If you turn the page and think about the political environment, Sean did a great job on taxes, so I'm not even going to attempt to tackle that. But one point that I wanted to make, which I think is especially pertinent for New Haven and the surrounding towns, is immigration, and I think we'll see some movement on this. Now, I'm going to make a statement with 2 points in it, and perhaps we could talk about this more in the Q&A. But New Haven needs two things from immigration. We need smart people from around the world to come here and learn. If you think about all the colleges and universities and private schools and prep schools that surround New Haven, a lot of those students come here because they want a great education, and they're coming here from around the world. We need that. Education is a big business for New Haven, and we need those students to come here. Some of the rhetoric around immigration caused a lot of those students to stay home. We need them to come back. That's important for New Haven. The second point that I'll make on immigration is we need those smart students to stay here and work. If you're a bright young man, a bright young woman, and you've gone to a college or a university in the New Haven area, you've gotten your education. Well, guess what? We want you to stay here and become a part of our economy. If you're thinking about starting a business, start it here. So we need smart students and we need smart workers. Very, very important. So pay attention to the immigration debate. I'm sure it's going to be very, very active as we move into the new year. A couple of charts on politics. I was looking for a chart where it showed what the S&P has done when you have a Democrat president, Democrat House, and a Republican Senate. Well, the last time that happened was in 1884. So I don't have a lot of good data, but bottom line, when we have divided government, if you look at the next page, the market actually does fairly well. So I know, I've got a lot of clients that are worried about, fighting in Congress. You know what? Divided government can actually lead to some pretty good legislation. So if you take a look historically, that's led to pretty good market returns. The following chart, Divided We Stand, shows, this was in the Wall Street Journal. I just thought it was a great chart. Take a look at the first chart there, 1980. Of the 3,000 counties in the United States, 391 of them were considered landslide counties. If you were a Democrat or Republican and you won the primary, you were a lock to get in. By 2000, 600 counties were considered to be landslide counties. In the latest election, 2020, over half of the counties, and take a look at that map there, it's color-coded for the Democrats or the Republicans. Those are pretty safe seats. So as a country, we're becoming more divided. What's very interesting, though, if you take a look at the second bullet point on my page, what we've seen, though, is that in this latest election, even though there are many more, let's say, landslide counties, from a voting standpoint, we actually voted to bring the government together. We voted for divided government. I think what we're looking for is a political environment where people can work together. So we're hoping that even though the electorate might be divided, that I think voters this year voted for let's go back to the center. Let's go back to get a little bit closer to normal. So we'll see what happens. We're hopeful, though. If you think about investing in 2021, slide 18, I know last time we got together, I said we were in that down cycle where you want to own growth, you want to own big cap. As I said earlier, if we're correct about the virtuous cycle, when you're investing your portfolio, you want to probably be more along the lines of an early cycle. You want to own more small cap. The emerging markets have done well. Value is doing very, very well. So we're shifting our portfolios. If you turn the page to page 19, you'll see that the emotional sentiment chart, which is very, very important, and you'll see where we were. Back in March, we were probably close to that panic and capitulation phase. We think we're on the upslope. The reason that's important, and I know if you turn the page, the type is very, very small. But this was a chart put together by our friends at J.P. Morgan. They did a great job, and they said, what were people talking about back in March? And if you see, you'll see a lot of those names are very, very famous people, and there was close to hysteria in the market. Talking about depressions and the worst, there's George Soros, the worst bear market in my lifetime. One of the things that you need to do, and it's very difficult to do, do is lean into the wind as an investor, and that's basically what you wanted to do back in March. Not get caught up in the emotion, but keep your head. If you're a sailor, you want to look at the horizon. Don't focus on the rocking boat. Look at the horizon and look at the big picture. And if you did that, you were probably a pretty successful investor last year. If you turn the page, the last couple of slides that I've got, this is a great, again, I apologize for the small type, but if you look at this, it takes the S&P 500, and that top line are the top 5 stocks, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, you know the names. And then that bottom line there, the blue line, are the other 495 stocks. So this really has been a market that's been driven by the big cap tech stocks. What we believe we'll see next year is a switch of those lines. The tech stocks will continue to do well, but what we're hoping is that the other 495 stocks in the market participate also. A broadening, if there's a broadening in the market, that's what we're hoping for. From an interest rate standpoint, if you turn the page, you'll see the 2-year and the 10-year Treasury. The Fed is definitely trying to keep rates low. I mean, rarely do we see the interest rate stay this low and this smooth for quite some time. We've been bouncing up close to 95 basis points. We do believe if we're successful in growing the economy, we could see that 10-year yield start to increase and creep up above 1%. But we think the Fed is really going to try and keep rates, especially the 2-year rate, low for, they've said, a couple of years. We'll get more testimony from the Fed next week, but we think the Fed is going to do that. Second to last chart, if you turn the page, you'll see a great chart, again, talking about growth versus value, and you'll see that since 2006, what you wanted to do was own growth stocks. Well, no trend lasts forever, and if we're correct about that broadening of the market, we think you could actually start to see value stocks do well next year, so we're hoping for that. The next chart, the 20-year cycle, again, what we do is we would just advise investors to don't get caught up in the headlines. You know, I know if you watch NBC or Fox and you go back and forth, sometimes you can go crazy with the screaming headlines and on the announcements on television. But if you try not to time the markets, have a plan, stick to it, you'll do much better. You know, this chart basically shows you that average investor tends to buy high and sell low. If you just stick with the market, stick with your plan, we think you'll do well. So that last page, my executive summary, number one, our traditional indicators didn't work going into the recession, but we think they're telling us a very good story coming out of the recession. So we're positive next year. Capital spending, less spending on structures, more spending on technology, but really to see capital spending increase, we need that vaccine. And then from a market standpoint, we're actually positive on the markets next year. We think you're going to see that beta rally, more of a risk-on rally, but we're positive on the markets. So Garrett, I'm going to end there and turn it back to you.
Great, thank you, John. And we're going to take a few moments for questions now. And John, as always, a great job. So if people want to put questions either into the chat, I see we have a few in the Q&A as well. We'll jump into a few of those. And John, does the timing of getting the vaccine out to everyone, is that really going to be impactful on where we stand with the economy overall?
Well, I'll tell you, as fast as possible. And again, it's not only getting the doses. It's as you know, I think I'm going to quote Dr. Vermund. We need capitalists and socialists to all join together and take that vaccine. It's not just getting the vaccine out there. We need wide adoption of that vaccine. You need to know that when you're going out to a restaurant, that everybody else in the restaurant has done their job and gotten the vaccine. So, getting it out there fast, but then also getting that adoption is critical to, again, regaining that confidence, because that's what's going to get the service side of the economy going.
There's a question about supply chains, and if you see a lot more coming back to the U.S. I know that was a trend that you touched on and that we started to see briefly at the beginning of the pandemic, or at least was talked about.
Yeah, we're definitely, again, I have the luxury of traveling out throughout the Northeast, and I don't care what kind of business you're in, people are concerned about their supply chain, and they're basically saying, look, even I think the Biden administration has made some very positive comments about getting back into the trade agreements. I think Joe Biden wants to get into the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which I think would be a great idea, but I think everybody is saying, you know what, the problems that we have with China are not going to go away with Joe Biden. So all of them are basically planning for longer supply chains and getting supply chains back. They may not come back to the U.S. What you could see is perhaps Mexico could benefit from this, some onshoring, but actually onshoring to North America. So the supply chains may not all come back to the U.S., but we do believe that the challenges that we have with trade with China won't just magically go away with a Biden administration. I think he's been very, very open there. So yeah, I think hopefully we'll see some onshoring, but I think Mexico could actually be a beneficiary of that onshoring trend as well as the U.S.
A question here, John, about New Haven and this region. How do you see New Haven, in particular, the New Haven region, having weathered the COVID-19 economic fallout? And do you think New Haven's well poised for when we get out of this?
Yeah, a couple of things. I know I've been in a couple of presentations where people have said, "Oh, everybody's leaving New York and Boston, and they're all coming to Connecticut," which we know it's great. We're all getting new neighbors, and I'm seeing that. Sean's seeing that. I'm seeing that in my town in Fairfield. Everybody moving up are young families from New York. But remember, Connecticut needs New York and Boston to be strong. And we believe they will be. Think about this. Anybody that's been down on Fifth Avenue, you remember the old Lord & Taylor department store? Well, Amazon just paid $1 billion to buy that department store, and they're going to put 2,000 engineers in that building to basically, be, smart people building out their corporate infrastructure. Madison Square Garden, the Farley post office behind that. Facebook just took every single square foot of office space, 730,000 square feet. They're going to put 15,000 people in there. So New York and Boston, we want them to be strong. But what you're seeing and where New Haven can really benefit is the fact that companies are saying, you know what, we don't need all of our people in New York and Boston all the time, and New Haven could be a major beneficiary of that. Certainly Connecticut. We're right between these two dominant powerhouses. So the themes that we've been seeing, companies saying we don't need all of our people in this very expensive Mecca, I think are going to accelerate, and especially with New Haven. Think about all the biotech that's gone on. We talked about that last year when we got together. New Haven is a biotech mecca, and just the fact that the research being done on the coronavirus, the cure, a lot of that is being done in New Haven is going to highlight the value of this market. So I think New Haven is going to benefit from New York and Boston still being strong, but companies saying, we don't need to have everybody here 24 hours a day. Let's think about moving some people out to the suburbs. And then New Haven is just going to be a beneficiary no matter what because of the biotech industries. This is a mecca, and it's being highlighted. So we should be very, very excited about the future for our town.
Yeah, and we do have Sean with us as well. Sean, you wanted to add something to that?
Yeah, and just to follow on to what John's saying, because I think he makes a great point, and I think he's completely right in that we need New York and Boston, to still be strong, as Connecticut being in that middle hub. But I do think, and anecdotally, what I am seeing within my clients that are based in the city is really to what John's saying, but they're looking at it and thinking about it differently. They may be taking office space that used to house all of their employees and turning that into premier client space and leaving some of their employees out remotely that will be working out of the New Haven area, Connecticut, New Jersey. So I don't think this needs to be a recovery at the expense of New York for Connecticut to benefit, because I think we're seeing companies think about these new environments differently and seeing somewhat of this remote workforce working for them in some ways and not in others.
A couple questions here too on healthcare and on oil as well. One question on health insurance costs, if you see those going up or or down? And then also a question about your oil price predictions there, John. Such a wide range was the comment.
Yeah, I'll take the oil first. That's the easier one. One of the things that we've seen is, I know I talked about this last year, and I deliberately didn't talk about it this year, is that the price of oil is not really an economic price, it's a political price. It really depends upon what the Saudis and the Russians want to do. They have cut back on production by a pretty wide amount. They announced that they're going to slowly start increasing production, but right now you've got Iran. The Biden administration has made overtures to try and get back into the accord, which could lead to more production out of Iran. Venezuela production has dropped dramatically, so there is still a tremendous amount of supply that could come online. We still believe oil is going to be trading in a range and not get too far out of hand, because I think the Saudis and the Russians are much more worried about $20 oil than they're envious of $80 oil. I think they want to keep it in this range because they don't want the fracking revolution in the U.S. to take off again. If you look at the number of rigs, the rig count has declined dramatically, and they know that a lot of those rigs really need $50, $60 a barrel oil to really become economically viable. Their break evens are lower, but you're not going to drill new wells at 40. You might pump from existing wells, but you're not going to drill new wells. So the Saudis want to keep prices down, and the Russians, just to slow down the U.S. fracking boom. On healthcare costs, unfortunately, we see those, continuing their march inexorably higher. I'll defer to the good doctor on the call. He probably is much more equipped to answer this call. But if anything, we see prices continuing to move higher, and But I'll defer to Dr. Vermund on that.
We just have a moment left, and Sean, I'll ask you this question as well. It does seem so critical right now for so many of our small businesses, especially, that there is some federal stimulus that comes out, hopefully in the next week, and then obviously we don't know about 2021. Sean, if you're still there, I'll ask you this question first. What do you think would be most impactful that we could see from Washington? And then John, same question for you.
Yeah, I think, in my opinion, and John probably is better to answer this one, but I would really say having another round of PPP loan funding, addressing the taxability of those PPP loans, I think they really help the middle market and smaller businesses, and I think it's a really important lifeline for our small and mid-market businesses, and we saw a lot of them take advantage of that in the first round. Really use that money to kind of keep operations moving along, and paying employees and workers. So, to me, in the companies that I work with, I think that's, one of the main things that they're really looking for.
Thanks, Sean. And John?
No, I would echo that. The number of small businesses that not only have closed but have said they're closing permanently it's a tragedy. I showed that chart about new businesses starting, but I could have easily shown a chart about existing businesses closing, and it's terrible. So if there's one thing that we would love to see in this plan, and it's being discussed, so I think we're going to see it, is more of a focus on small businesses, keeping them alive and having the loans be forgivable. We've got to have a real program designed to help small businesses to keep them alive, and that'll help the employment situation.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think, a lot of our mid-market clients and businesses, again, avail themselves of the PPP loan, but have more of an opportunity to keep operations moving and find other sources of liquidity and funding. I think those really small businesses, are much more impacted by having to have physical locations shut down or curtailed. And I think it's much more of a lifeline to them as they don't have as much access to capital and liquidity. So, and I think that goes back to some of the comments we heard in the opening video, Garrett, of people's concerns is can we weather through the winter and the spring until a vaccine is really here and help keep those businesses and help keep their doors open.
Well, Sean and John, thank you both. Dean Vermund, who joined us earlier. Great information. I think we answered a lot of those questions that we started with in that opening video. Obviously, it's still a very dangerous time for everyone. We want everyone to be safe. Before we close out, I do want to just, I want to thank Jeff Klaus and our board of directors, everyone who supported the chamber this year. Thank the chamber staff who did a great job bringing this all together for you. Also, just want to let you know about a couple of programs we have coming up still. We have our executive orientation that's starting in January. This is a great program. It's part of our leadership center. If you're new to the area, new to a higher management position, to really become familiarized with what's going on in our region. And then our regional legislative forums will be taking place in January. More details on that. But in a virtual format, we're going to provide you more opportunities. And then our internship and career fair is scheduled for late February 2021. Thank you again to all of our sponsors who helped put this program on. Again, People's United Bank, RSM, New Haven Lawn Club will be back with you next year, Story Reel Studios, and New Haven Register. Very happy holidays to everyone. Stay safe. Please support those small businesses, all of our business. This has been a very difficult year, but we're making it through and we're optimistic for 2021. Have a great day, everyone.